So there's another measure that we can look at to tell us if our model that we've come up with here is any good. So what's that measure that we're going to come up with that's going to tell us if this model is any good? That measure is actually called R squared. Just an R with a square on it. And what is that? Well, R squared is going to tell us the proportion of the overall variability in Y, the dependent variable, from its mean that can be explained by changes in X, the independent variable. So in our particular scenario that we have, R squared will tell us the proportion of the overall variability in estimated cells away from their mean. So how much your cells vary from their mean, that can be explained by changes in your advertising spend. So it's telling me how much advertising is shifting my estimated cells away from their mean. So it's going to give us a value between 0 and 1. And you can express it, that's a proportion here, you can express it as a percentage between 0 and 100%. So more particularly, what does R squared equals 1 mean? Well, R squared means you have perfect relationship between X and Y, a perfect linear relationship between, in our case, advertising spend and estimated sales. What that is saying, if you tell me your advertising spend, I can use my model to perfectly predict what your sales are going to be. Now, it's possible, theoretically, but it's unlikely that advertising spend is going to perfectly predict your sales because other items come into it, other factors. Your sales may depend on the weather. If you have bad weather in a particular day, your sales may change. If you had good staff working for you, they may improve your sales or make you take your sales down. So it's unlikely that advertising spend is going to perfectly predict estimated sales when we get an R squared value of 1. If R squared equals 0, if we get 0, it just is telling us that basically advertising does not impacting on sales. So the actual calculation, we don't actually have to do ourselves. Excel does it for us, and it's right here. So R squared is 0.77 if you want to express it as a percentage, or we can express it as a proportion of 0.766. So it's up to us how we actually write it down, but let's go with what they've got here. It's about 0.77, and that's 0.76. Let's put 0.77. So R squared for our particular question is 0.77. It's closer to 1 than it is to 0, so it's closer to being perfect than having no value at all. The fact that it's not 100% is actually an indication to us that this model is not perfect, that there are other factors. It's telling me it's not 100%, it's 77%. It's saying there are other factors that are impacting on estimated sales, not just advertising. Advertising is pretty strong though, but we could add additional factors into here to try to predict our estimated sales. Say for example, the weather. Somehow we can actually find a factor that's going to help us out with the weather, or the experience of our sales staff. But we can put in other factors. That would actually become a multiple linear regression model, which we're not looking at. We're just looking at the linear ones. But right here, we know by looking at R squared equals 0.77 that there's other factors that are impacting on your estimated sales, even though this model is still pretty good.